I still remember the look on Mark's face as he leaned back in his chair, that smug half-smile pulling at his mouth. "You," he said, glancing around the conference table as if someone else might jump in to correct me. "You think you can lead this program? That's adorable, Rachel." I felt the blood rush to my face, but I didn't say a word. My hands stayed folded in my lap. My voice lodged itself somewhere behind my ribs, trapped under years of being told I was too quiet, too sensitive, too ordinary. He didn't stop there. He tapped the manila folder in front of me and sighed like he was breaking bad news to a child. "Just focus on taking notes, okay?" he added, softer this time, like he thought he was being kind. Around the table, no one spoke up. Not Hannah, with her polished red nails. Not Brian, who used to ask me for advice behind closed doors. I just nodded, my lips pressed together so hard they almost split. I've spent most of my life being underestimated. It's funny how quickly people decide who you are based on how softly you speak, or how you'd rather stay late to help clean up than stand in the spotlight. When I was a kid, my mom, Janice, used to introduce me as her little helper. I don't think she meant anything by it, but the word stuck to me like labels I could never peel off. My brother, Matthew, was the big dreamer. My sister, Kelly, was the firecracker. I was just the helper, the reliable, steady one who never needed too much. I remember one Christmas, when I was 8, my dad, Roger, handed out the gifts with the same dramatic flourish he always did. Matthew got the remote control car he'd circled in the catalog. Kelly got a giant art set she'd been begging for. When it was my turn, Dad glanced at Mom like he wasn't sure what the box even was. "This one's for Rachel," he said, almost like an afterthought. I opened the wrapping paper to find a beige sweater. No note. No explanation. Just a plain sweater, 2 sizes too big. "Perfect for you," Mom said, patting my shoulder as if I should be grateful. Practical. Practical. That was me in a single word. At school, it wasn't much different. In 3rd grade, Mrs. Dalton asked us to draw what we wanted to be when we grew up. I sketched a picture of a teacher standing in front of a classroom. I colored her dress blue and gave her the same brown hair I had. When I showed it to Mrs. Dalton, she smiled politely. "That's nice, Rachel," she said, moving on to the boy behind me before I could explain how much I meant it. Everywhere I turned, people decided I was background. The one who fetched things. The one who took care of everyone else. In middle school, it got worse. I started tutoring kids who struggled with reading. I loved it, seeing the look on their faces when something finally clicked. But when I told my parents I was thinking about becoming a literacy coach someday, my mom just wrinkled her nose. "Is that even a real job?" she asked. "Maybe you should pick something a little more stable." When I was 16, Matthew started dating a girl named Alexis. She was glamorous in that glossy, intimidating way. The first time she came to dinner, she talked about how she planned to run her own company by 25. Everyone leaned in, captivated. Even my dad hung on her every word. I tried to chime in to say I'd been volunteering at the library, that I was leading a reading circle for younger kids. But no one asked questions. No one even nodded. After they left, Mom gave me a look I'd learned to recognize. The look that said, "Don't make everything about you." I never made anything about me. That was the problem. In college, I picked education as my major. Not because it was practical, but because something in me knew I was meant to help others find their voice, even if I hadn't found mine yet. Freshman year, I got paired with a professor named Dr. Cohen. She was the first person who really saw me. I'll never forget the day she pulled me aside after class. "Rachel," she said, her hand resting gently on my shoulder, "you have a way of listening that makes people feel safe. You can teach people things no textbook can." Her words clung to me like armor. For a little while they kept me warm. But when I came home for Thanksgiving, I made the mistake of sharing the compliment. Matthew laughed so hard, he nearly choked on his mashed potatoes. "You," he sputtered. "Teach people? That's hilarious." Even Dad smiled, like it was a cute phase I'd grow out of. I didn't argue. I just swallowed my disappointment and passed the gravy. After graduation, I took a job at a small community center in Houston. The pay was terrible, the hours long, but I felt like I was doing something that mattered. I started working with teenagers who'd slipped through the cracks, kids everyone else had written off as lazy or hopeless. Every day, I sat with them one by one listening to their stories. Some had parents who barely remembered they existed. Some had been told so many times they were worthless that they'd started to believe it. It wasn't lost on me how much I related to them. The first time I led a workshop alone, my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the stack of worksheets. But by the end of the hour, 3 of the kids had stayed behind to ask if I could help them again. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was more than just the helper. Still, when I called home that night, Mom didn't ask how it went. She was too busy telling me about Matthew's new job at a big tech company. "That's real success," she said. "You know, something you can build a future on." I thought about the kids I'd spent the day with. I thought about the way they'd looked at me, like I was the only person who'd ever believed in them. And I knew, deep down, I was building something, even if they couldn't see it. But it would take years and 1,000 tiny acts of faith to prove to myself that I was more than background noise. It wasn't until I was 34, sitting in that sterile conference room with Mark dismissing me like I was nothing, that all those moments finally crystallized into one truth. I was done waiting for someone to give me permission to matter. The day after that meeting with Mark, I arrived early, as usual. The halls were still dark, the cleaning staff wheeling carts of supplies past the frosted glass doors. I liked the quiet hour before everyone else rushed in. It was the only time I didn't have to brace myself for the performance of fitting in. But that morning, I couldn't stop replaying Mark's voice in my head. "You think you can lead this program? That's adorable." I sat at my desk, staring at the email draft I'd started a dozen times. I thought about sending him the proposal anyway, attaching the research I'd spent 6 months compiling. But each time my cursor hovered over send, my chest tightened. Was I really going to fight for a chance to be dismissed again? I closed the laptop and folded my hands in my lap. My palms were clammy. Around 9, the office started filling up. I heard Hannah's laugh echo down the hall, Brian's deep voice rumbling through the glass. When the door swung open, Mark was the first to enter. He glanced at me, then at my empty hands. "No materials today?" he asked lightly, as if he hadn't humiliated me the day before. I shook my head. "I'm not presenting," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He raised an eyebrow. "Suit yourself." Everyone settled in. Mark took his usual place at the head of the table. The meeting started with updates and project timelines, and then he cleared his throat. "I want to address the pilot mentorship program we discussed yesterday," he said. For a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd reconsidered. That he'd see my work for what it was worth. He gestured toward Brian. "Brian's agreed to take point," he said. "He's got the drive and the presence to get it off the ground." Brian looked surprised. A little flattered. He glanced at me, his face tightening in apology. I stared at the table. No one said a word about the months I'd spent designing the curriculum, the late nights I'd stayed to compile case studies, the dozens of interviews I'd done with community partners. It was as if none of it and none of me had ever existed. After the meeting, I stayed in my chair, waiting for the rest to clear out. Brian lingered a moment. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I didn't ask for this." I nodded. "I know." He hesitated. "You should talk to Mark. He might." "No," I said softly. "It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Not really. It was the final, undeniable proof that in their eyes, I'd never be more than the girl in the corner taking notes. That afternoon, I sat in the break room, my mug cradled in my hands. The microwave hummed behind me, and someone's lunch smelled like cheap noodles. I didn't see Hannah until she was standing next to me. "You okay?" she asked, not meeting my eyes. "I'm fine," I lied. "Look, don't take it personally," she said, her voice dropping. "You know how it is. Mark wants someone who looks the part." "Looks the part?" She winced. "You know, someone who commands the room." I thought of all the ways I'd been told I was lacking. Too quiet, too soft, too careful. "Sure," I said, my throat burning. That night I called my mom. Maybe I was hoping she'd say something different, something supportive.
Instead, she sighed.
Sweetheart, she said, maybe you just have to accept that not everyone is cut out for leadership. There's no shame in staying where you're comfortable. I almost laughed. Comfortable? Did she really think it was comfortable to disappear? To pretend I was content with being overlooked? Yeah, I said, my voice small. Maybe. After I hung up, I sat in the dark living room for a long time, watching headlights flicker past my window. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. My body felt heavy, like I was moving underwater. I dressed slowly, putting on the same gray slacks and navy blouse I'd worn 100 times. As I slipped my shoes on, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt excited to walk into that building. On my way out the door, I paused by the mirror in the hallway. I looked the part, I thought bitterly.
Polite.
Professional. Invisible. I drove to work in silence. No music. No podcasts. Just the low roar of the tires on the road, and my own voice echoing in my head. Why are you still here? In the parking garage, I sat in the car long after I'd turned off the ignition. My hands rested on the steering wheel, the key still between my fingers. For so long, I believed that if I just worked harder, if I stayed late, said yes to every request, smiled when I wanted to scream, someone would finally see me. But no one was coming to validate me. No one was going to tap me on the shoulder and say, Rachel, you're enough. It had to be me. I finally stepped out of the car and walked toward the elevators. My heart thudded in my chest. When I reached my desk, I didn't bother sitting down. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through job postings. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, only that it wasn't this. Mark walked by a few minutes later. He gave me a nod that felt like dismissal. Like he'd already forgotten what he'd taken from me. I watched him go. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I knew I wasn't going to let them tell my story anymore. The first thing I did was stop replying to emails after 5 p.m. It was a small act, almost petty by my old standards, but it felt revolutionary. I'd spent years believing that responsiveness was the same thing as value. That if I didn't prove myself constantly, they'd forget I existed. I wanted them to forget. On Thursday morning, I arrived an hour later than usual. I'd always been the one to turn the lights on, to restock the printer paper, to brew the first pot of coffee before anyone else had even parked. Not anymore. When Mark walked past my desk, he paused, frowning. Everything all right? He asked, his voice neutral. I looked up at him. For the first time, I didn't feel the reflexive need to make him comfortable. Fine, I said, just adjusting my schedule. He waited, as if expecting an apology or an explanation. When I offered neither, he moved on. I began to collect small freedoms like precious stones. I took my lunch breaks outside instead of at my desk, where I used to sit eating stale sandwiches, so I'd be available in case someone needed me. I stopped volunteering to organize the staff birthdays or clean out the supply closet. On Friday, I walked past the conference room where Brian was leading the pilot mentorship program, the program I'd built from the ground up. Through the glass, I saw him fumbling with the materials I'd left behind. He looked out of place, like he'd put on someone else's clothes. For a second, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. But mostly, I felt relief. It wasn't mine to carry anymore. I went back to my desk and opened my laptop. For years, I dreamed of creating something on my own, some kind of coaching practice or training consultancy. I never let myself think it could actually happen. But sitting there, watching the shape of my old life shrink behind me, I finally let the thought expand. What if I didn't need their permission? What if I already had everything I needed? That weekend, I didn't check my work email once. On Saturday morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a legal pad. At the top of the page, I wrote, "What do I want?" It felt like the first honest question I'd asked myself in years. The answer came slowly in pieces. I wanted to help people who'd been underestimated. The quiet ones. The ones who felt invisible. I wanted to build something that didn't require me to fit into a mold that had never been shaped for me. I wanted freedom. I spent hours scribbling notes, workshop ideas, a list of people I could reach out to, possible names for a website. By the time the sun set, I felt lighter than I had in a decade. On Monday, I walked into the office with a new clarity. I didn't announce anything. I didn't grandstand. I just started removing my energy from the places that didn't value it. When Mark forwarded me an after-hours request to revise a slide deck, I waited until the next morning to reply. "Will do." I typed nothing more. When Hannah asked if I could help her organize the quarterly reports, something she'd dumped on me for 3 years, I smiled and said, "I'm sorry, but I won't have time for that." Her eyebrows shot up. "Are you sure? You've always—" "I'm sure," I said, my voice calm. It was almost comical how unsettled everyone became when I stopped saying yes. A week later, Mark called me into his office. He gestured for me to sit, folding his hands on the desk like a disappointed parent. "I've noticed a change in your attitude lately," he began. I nodded, saying nothing. "You used to be so reliable."
"So team-oriented," he continued.
I tilted my head, waiting for him to finish. "I'd hate to see you limit your growth here," he said finally. I almost laughed. Growth? For years, he'd been the ceiling over my head. "I appreciate your concern," I said evenly. "But I'm exactly where I need to be." He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have stopped him. For the first time, I wasn't shrinking to make him comfortable. That evening, I closed my work laptop and tucked it into my bag without a second thought. At home, I opened my personal computer and pulled up a draft website I'd started years earlier and abandoned. I clicked edit. I started updating the copy, describing the services I wanted to offer, the kind of clients I wanted to help, the philosophy I believed in. My hand shook on the mouse, but I kept going. The next morning, I created a separate email account. A small, private space that belonged only to me and this thing I was building. It was just a beginning, but it was mine. For the first time, my silence wasn't a prison. It was an invitation to listen to myself. And what I heard was a voice that had been waiting decades to speak. 3 weeks after I quietly started building my coaching practice, an email landed in my new inbox. Subject: Request for mentorship, referred by Claire Johnson. I blinked at the screen. Claire Johnson. The name brought back a memory I hadn't thought of in years. She'd been a volunteer at the community center when I first started. She was just 19 then, nervous, brittle, and painfully eager to prove herself. I'd taken her under my wing without even thinking about it. I clicked open the message. "Hi, Rachel. I hope this isn't too forward. Claire Johnson gave me your email. She said you helped her when no one else did. She told me you taught her how to believe she had something to offer. I'm in a similar place right now. Burned out, overlooked, unsure if I should even keep trying. If you're open to it, I'd love to learn from you. Warmly, Eva Martinez." I read the email 3 times, my chest tight with something I couldn't name. I'd spent so many years believing I had nothing special to offer, that my empathy, my patience, my careful way of seeing people was ordinary, that it would never count for anything. And here was proof, undeniable and unexpected, that someone out there had carried my words forward. I typed out a reply before I could second-guess myself. "Hi, Eva. Thank you so much for reaching out and for trusting me with your story. I'd be honored to talk with you about where you're at and how I might help. Let's set up a time to connect. Warmly, Rachel." I hit send. My hands were shaking, but not from fear this time, from possibility. That evening, I texted Claire. "Rachel, hey, I just heard from Eva. Thank you for sending her my way." "Claire, of course. I've been telling people about you for years. You changed my life, you know." I stared at that message, my heart thudding. I didn't know. Not really. Claire had been the quiet one in the corner, the volunteer everyone overlooked. She told me once that she felt invisible, and I'd sat with her every Tuesday afternoon, helping her figure out how to find her own voice. I never imagined she'd remember me, much less tell anyone I mattered. That weekend, I met Eva for coffee. She was younger than I expected, late 20s, with dark curls pulled into a messy bun and a guarded look in her eyes. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice low. "Of course," I said. "Tell me what's been happening." For the next hour, she poured it out. The job that drained her, the boss who took credit for her ideas, the feeling that she was fading into the wallpaper. I listened without interrupting. I saw myself in every word she spoke. When she finally stopped, she looked down at her hands. "I don't know why I'm telling you all this," she whispered. I smiled. "Because you already know you're ready to change." She looked up, her eyes wet. "Claire said you'd understand," she said. "She said you were the only person who ever made her feel seen." A lump rose in my throat. "Thank you for telling me that," I said quietly. By the time we parted, she was sitting up straighter. She even smiled as she left. I watched her go, my heart thrumming with a strange, tender pride. I'd never needed to stand at the head of the conference table to lead. I'd been leading all along, in the quiet corners, in the unseen hours, in the spaces no one else thought were important. That night, I updated my website again. I added a new section, Mentorship for the Overlooked. Below it, I wrote, "You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to be seen by everyone to matter to someone." Over the next 2 weeks, more emails trickled in. A woman named Kelsey, who'd heard about me through Eva. A man named Darren who'd seen a LinkedIn post Claire shared. Each time, they wrote the same thing in different words. "I heard you help people who feel like they don't belong." I did, because I was one of them. One evening, I got a call I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Hello. Rachel? Hi, it's Lila. Lila Patel." I searched my memory, and then I remembered Lila had been in the very first reading circle I'd ever led at the community center. She'd been 13 then, shy and smart, with big brown eyes that lit up when she finally mastered a passage. "Oh, hi, Lila," I said, surprised. "I know this is out of the blue," she said, her voice trembling a little. "But I just wanted to say thank you. I don't know if you remember, but you helped me so much. You made me feel like I could do something valuable." I closed my eyes, my hand pressed to my chest. "I remember," I whispered. "I'm a teacher now," she said. "I have my own reading circle. I tell my students about you all the time." The tears came then, hot, unstoppable. "You have no idea what that means to me," I said. "I just wanted you to know," she said. "You made a difference." After we hung up, I sat there in the dark, my phone resting on my knee. All those years I'd believed I was invisible, that I'd left no mark at all. And here they were, these women and men I'd quietly helped, turning up one by one to remind me that I had always been more than they thought. I thought back to the day Mark told me to just focus on taking notes. I smiled. They'd had it backward. While they were busy underestimating me, I'd been learning how to see people. And now, those people were showing up to see me in return. It was strange how quickly the tide began to shift. The first sign came in the form of a voicemail from my brother, Matthew. "Hey, Rach," he began, his tone falsely casual. "Mom said you're doing some kind of coaching thing now. That's great. I mean, really great. We should catch up." He didn't mention that I hadn't heard from him in almost 6 months. Or that the last time we spoke, he told me I was wasting my time at the community center when I could be doing something real. I didn't return the call. 2 days later, Mom called while I was reviewing notes from a session with Eva. "Hi, sweetheart," she chirped, as though she hadn't been subtly dismissive of my ambitions for most of my adult life. "I saw your little website. It looks professional." "Thanks," I said carefully. "I was thinking," she continued, her voice turning syrupy. "Your cousin Madison just graduated, and she's been feeling a little lost. Maybe you could talk to her." I knew what this was. They weren't reaching out because they respected what I'd built. They were reaching out because other people had started to respect it. Because the story of me as the helper, the sweet little girl who never amounted to much, was crumbling, and they didn't want to be left behind. "I'm booked solid right now," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "But I'm sure Madison will find someone perfect to help her." Mom hesitated. "Well, maybe you can at least give her some pointers? She really needs guidance." I closed my laptop slowly. "I'm sure she does," I said. but I'm not available." There was a long, brittle silence. "Oh," Mom said finally, her voice cooling.
"Well,
"If you change your mind." "I won't," I said gently. After we hung up, I exhaled shakily. My phone buzzed again almost immediately. This time it was Hannah, the coworker who used to hand me her work like I was an assistant she didn't have to pay. "Hey," her text read, with an abundance of exclamation marks. "Saw your post about your new business. So inspiring. Could you maybe share some tips? Thinking about pivoting my brand, too." I didn't reply. The next week, I got an email from Mark. Subject: Potential collaboration opportunity. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. "Hi, Rachel. I hope you're well. I've been following your recent work with great interest. It's clear you've developed a unique approach to coaching that's getting results. I'd love to discuss how we might partner on some projects here at the firm. Perhaps you'd be interested in coming back in a consulting capacity to help train the team? Looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Best,
Mark."
I leaned back in my chair, a slow, incredulous laugh escaping my throat. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have trusted me to lead a 10-minute workshop. Now he was asking me to train the same team that once dismissed me as adorable. I closed the email without replying. That evening, I called Eva to check in. She sounded lighter, happier. "I don't know what's shifted," she said, "but I'm finally starting to believe I'm allowed to want more." "You are," I said quietly. "You always were." After we hung up, I sat on the couch, my phone resting on my knee, and thought about how strange it was that as soon as you start living on your own terms, everyone who once doubted you tries to stake a claim on your success. It wasn't about me, I realized. It was about their discomfort with the version of me they couldn't control. The next morning, I woke to a message from Mom. "Can we talk? I don't want there to be bad blood." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. For most of my life, I would have felt guilty for the distance, convinced it was my job to make everyone feel comfortable. But I wasn't that person anymore. I was allowed to be proud. I was allowed to say no. I set the phone down without replying. That afternoon, Claire called. "I hope you don't mind," she began, "but a local nonprofit reached out to me about your work. They're looking for someone to train their mentors. I gave them your info." I smiled. "I don't mind at all. They said they heard about you from someone at your old job," she continued, sounding amused.
"Of course they did."
It was easier for Mark and the others to brag that they'd discovered me than admit they'd tried to shrink me. I thanked Claire and hung up. I thought about all the years I'd spent quietly waiting for validation, for someone to tell me I was allowed to lead. And now, here I was, turning down opportunities one would have begged for not long ago. Not because I was ungrateful, because I finally understood that acceptance from people who never valued me wasn't worth the cost. Later that evening, my phone buzzed again. A message from Hannah. "Could you maybe ask that nonprofit if they'd consider me for a role? You know I'd be a great fit." I didn't respond. Instead, I closed my eyes and let the quiet settle around me like a warm blanket. I'd spent decades trying to belong to rooms that were never meant for me. I wasn't going to step back into them just because someone finally noticed I was gone. It was late on a Sunday evening when I received the message that would stay with me longer than any of the polite apologies or hollow invitations to reconnect. I just settled onto the couch with a cup of tea, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a weekend spent working with clients who genuinely valued what I offered. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, lighting up with a name I hadn't thought about in years. Amanda Ruiz. Amanda had been one of the kids in my first community literacy group. She must have been 12 then, a small, watchful girl who never raised her hand, always sitting in the corner like she was bracing for disappointment. She rarely spoke unless I asked her a question directly, and even then, her voice was a whisper. I picked up the phone, feeling my pulse quicken with curiosity. I tapped open the message. "Hi, Ms. Rachel," it began. "I don't know if you remember me, but I've thought about you so many times over the years. You probably won't realize how much you helped me. You were the first adult who ever treated me like I wasn't stupid." I pressed a hand to my mouth, blinking back the sudden sting in my eyes. I'm about to graduate college, and I'm applying for my first teaching job. I thought you should know that I'm going to start my own reading circle when I get hired. Because you did that for me. Because you made me believe I could. I read her words over and over. You made me believe I could. That was all I'd ever wanted, really. To be the person I hadn't had when I was her age, someone who looked at me and saw potential instead of inconvenience. I typed a reply slowly, making sure every word carried the weight of what I felt. Amanda, I remember you very well. I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished. I always knew you'd make a difference. You already have. Before I could overthink it, I hit send. I set the phone down and leaned back against the cushions, letting a tear slip down my cheek. It was the kind that didn't sting anymore, just the warm relief of knowing that all those small acts of kindness, all the times I'd stayed late or listened a little longer, hadn't disappeared into the void. They had made ripples. I thought back to the day I'd first met Amanda, how her hair had fallen in her face as she stared at the page in front of her. I'd crouched beside her and said, "You don't have to get it perfect. You just have to keep trying." It felt surreal to think that those words had traveled with her all these years, a quiet refrain she carried through middle school, high school, college. Long after the others had dismissed me, she'd remembered. That night, I received another message, this one from Eva. "Rachel, I just wanted you to know that today I presented my first workshop to my team. For the first time, I didn't apologize for having ideas. I kept hearing you say, 'You deserve to be in the room.'" I smiled so wide it hurt. I replied, "Eva, you were always meant to be in the room. I'm just glad you let me remind you. For so long, I'd been desperate for someone to recognize my worth. I thought it had to come from people like Mark or my family, the ones who never understood me. But here it was instead, from the very people I'd quietly poured my heart into when no one was looking. These messages weren't about boosting my ego. They were about proof. Proof that showing up with kindness and patience mattered. Proof that no matter how invisible I'd felt, my presence had left a mark. The next morning, I woke up to another email, this time from the nonprofit Claire had connected me to. "We'd like to formally invite you to facilitate a 6-week training program for our staff. Several of our team members have shared how much your insights have already helped them." I accepted without hesitation. On the first day of the program, I walked into a bright, sunlit conference room where a dozen people waited, notebooks open, eyes attentive. As I set my materials on the table, I took a moment to just look at them. These professionals who had come to learn from me, not because they'd been assigned to, but because they wanted to. I began by telling them what I wish someone had told me at their stage. "You don't have to perform a version of leadership that doesn't fit you," I said. "The quiet way you care, the way you pay attention, the way you notice the things other people miss, those are strengths. You don't have to become louder to matter." I saw heads nodding, shoulders relaxing. After the session, a woman named Monica approached me. She looked nervous, like she was trying to find the right words. "I hope this isn't weird," she said, "but you remind me that it's okay to lead the way I am." I smiled. "That's not weird at all. That's exactly why I'm here." She looked down, then back up at me with a small, brave smile.
"Thank you," she said.
I don't think I ever believed that before. On my drive home, I thought about how different this felt from the validation I used to chase. This wasn't about proving myself to people who'd never understand me. It was about proving to the people who needed me, and to myself, that my quiet way of showing up was powerful all along. That evening, I sat down at my desk and pulled out my old journal, the one I'd started in college. I flipped to the very first page, where I'd written in neat, hopeful letters, "Someday, I will help people feel seen." I closed the journal gently, my hand resting on the worn cover. Someday was here. It was almost inevitable that they would try one more time. The last attempt came on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was sitting at my kitchen table, finalizing next month's mentorship schedule, when my phone buzzed. Mom calling. I let it ring until voicemail picked up. I didn't have the energy to perform politeness anymore. A minute later, the alert appeared. One new voicemail. I closed my laptop and pressed play, resting my chin on my hand as her voice filled the quiet kitchen.
Hi, sweetheart.
I don't know if you're ignoring me or just busy, but I really think we should talk. There was a pause. I could hear the muffled sound of the television in the background. I know things have been strained, she continued carefully. But you've always been such an important part of this family.
We don't want to lose that.
I don't want to lose that. Another pause, longer this time. I've been telling everyone about your business, she said, her voice brightening like she thought this would please me. About how you're helping all those people. Your aunt said she always knew you'd do something meaningful. Maybe you could come over Sunday? We can start fresh. My chest tightened, not with longing, but with the quiet certainty that I didn't need to hear any more. It wasn't an apology. It was an invitation to resume my old role, the obliging daughter who swallowed her hurt so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. I deleted the message, without saving it. The next morning, Mark emailed me again. Hi, Rachel. Just wanted to follow up on my last note. We'd really value your input here. Maybe we could meet for coffee and talk about how you could help us get the mentorship initiative back on track? The old reflex, guilt, the desire to be seen as gracious, flickered in my chest before dissolving. I didn't owe him an explanation. I didn't owe any of them anything. Still, I thought about how to reply for almost an hour. Not because I was conflicted, but because I wanted to make sure I didn't slip back into performing politeness just to be liked. Finally, I typed 2 short sentences. Hi, Mark. Thank you for reaching out. I'm not available. That was it. No elaboration. No apology. No performative softening. I hovered over the send button, breathing in this strange mix of freedom and finality. Then I clicked.
Done.
That evening, Matthew texted. Mom said you wouldn't answer her calls. She's really upset. Can you please just call her back? It doesn't have to be such a big deal. I read it twice, marveling at how familiar it felt. This was the story of my entire life. Everyone else's discomfort was always more important than my peace. I set the phone down and walked to the window. The rain was still falling, streaking the glass in silvery rivulets. Somewhere in the past, I might have believed that peace came from smoothing things over, from keeping everyone happy. Now I knew the truth. Peace was a door you could close, gently and completely. It was saying no, without anger, without justification, without regret. It was understanding that closure didn't require an audience. 2 days later, Hannah sent a message. Hey, heard you turned down Mark. Bold move. Honestly, you always were so determined. We should catch up sometime. Drinks on me? I didn't reply. A week passed without any further attempts. And then, early one Saturday morning, Mom called again. I let it ring, as I always did now. Another voicemail. Rachel, I wish you'd talk to me. I don't understand what you're doing. I thought about that as I loaded the dishwasher, her voice echoing from the phone propped on the counter. She didn't understand. And that was okay. When the last plate was stacked neatly in the rack, I walked over and pressed delete. It felt like placing a period at the end of a sentence I'd been writing my entire life. Later that day, I went for a walk in the park. The air smelled like damp earth and budding grass. I passed a woman sitting on a bench, her toddler asleep in a stroller beside her. She looked tired in the way I used to, like she was carrying everyone's expectations and had no hands left for her own dreams. I caught her eyes, smiled. She looked startled for a moment, then smiled back. It felt like the smallest, simplest gift I could offer, the recognition of another woman who was probably braver than she realized. On the walk home, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a text from Eva.
Just wanted to say thank you again.
I finally feel like I'm in charge of my own life. I stopped on the sidewalk, feeling a warmth bloom in my chest that had nothing to do with the sun breaking through the clouds. This was where my energy belonged. Not in old battles. Not in unearned forgiveness. But here. Quiet. Unapologetic.
Free.
I slipped my phone back into my pocket, the weight of it no longer tethering me to the past. When I reached my door, I paused with my hand on the knob. For so long, I'd believed that to be loved, I had to say yes. Today, I'd learned something better. Sometimes love is the quiet strength to say no. No drama. No pleading.
Just peace.
It's funny what you start to see when you stop trying to be seen. For most of my life, I measured my worth through their eyes. The family that always overlooked me, the coworkers who talked over me, the people who said they meant well while quietly chipping away at my spirit. I believed I had to earn love by proving I was useful, by overgiving, overexplaining, and overextending myself until there was nothing left. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough for them. I was too quiet, too sensitive, too careful.
To me.
So I tried to become smaller,
Softer.
easier to digest. I tried to speak in ways they could understand, love in ways that didn't ask too much, exist in ways that didn't inconvenience anyone. And all that trying, it almost erased me, until I finally stopped, until I finally asked myself, what if there's nothing wrong with the way I am? What if they're not my mirror? That question saved me. Because once I stopped shrinking for people who preferred a smaller version of me, I began to grow in ways I didn't even know were possible. I built something. I became something. I became the person I once needed, the person I looked for in crowded rooms and empty silences. The one who didn't flinch when others walked away, who didn't tremble when told to know her place, who didn't wait for permission to speak. And now I mentor people who feel the way I once felt, overlooked, unheard, underestimated. I see them fully. And because I see them, they begin to see themselves. I've learned that power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, rooted.
Still.
It lives in the choice to say no without guilt, to walk away without noise, to stay kind without staying small. So if you're watching this, whoever you are, wherever you're at, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not too much or not enough. You are simply not for everyone. And that's okay. You're not supposed to be. You're not here to convince people who benefit from your silence to start listening. You're here to find the ones who already do. The ones who see your quiet power and don't try to mute it. The ones who don't call you dramatic for having boundaries. The ones who don't confuse your kindness with weakness. Those people exist. They're waiting for you to stop waiting. And once you do, once you take even one small step away from the places that never made space for you, you'll be amazed at who shows up. It might not be your family. It might not be your coworkers or old friends. But it will be the right people. The ones who value you, not for how well you can serve them, but for who you are when no one is watching. And the best part? You don't need a grand comeback to find them. You don't need to make noise. You just need to be you. Fully.
Softly.
Powerfully. So this is my message to you. Let them doubt you. Let them whisper. Let them stay confused about how you became someone they don't recognize anymore. You're not here to explain your glow to people who kept you in the dark. You're here to shine, for yourself. For the ones watching quietly, wondering if it's possible. Wondering if someone like them can become someone like you. They can. You just did. You don't need to be louder. You just need to stop apologizing for your light. That's what they didn't see in me. That's what they never expected.
And now?
Now they're watching from the sidelines while I mentor the very people they overlooked. Now I don't need their permission. Now I don't need their praise. Now I know. They didn't think I had it in me. But I always did. And so do you.